Okay, so that's how I do the little waves, and the way that I paint waves in any of my water scenes is just by trying to master that stroke, that shape. You know, if a painter was a ninja, then you know that stroke is the secret weapon that you know you just want to strive to have mastery of, having every single stroke come out consistently that shape, so you can build the larger shapes out of the littler shapes. The truth is, I would like to see this dirt be this sand that's under the water be a much lighter color. In hindsight, now that I'm seeing it on the canvas, I would like that. But rather than continuing to adjust this portion of the picture, I could really use a change of scenery. I don't have the longest attention span for working on the same part of a painting. And so I'm going to do something fun and do the big wave now. I really like doing the big wave rolling in with the brighter, greener light coming through it. And then I'll probably come back and use a lighter gray, a much lighter gray in this foreground, because I just think that'll be a nicer, brighter tropical look to have that. But nevertheless, the technique is still the same. It's still right there. That's exactly how I'm going to do it. And it's nice to have the confidence that if I want to adjust anything, it's just a matter of overlapping underwater color, then reflection color, and then just, striving to line up the reflection with what it's overlapping. And because of the busyness of this particular kind of texture, you really don't see overlaps that much because there's just so many little strokes. So I actually think it's fun to come back and adjust what I've done. It can be such an overwhelming headache when you're under pressure to get something done. To think, oh, I gotta redo it. But on a project like this that I'm doing for enjoyment, it's always a learning experience. I always feel like I'm adding further knowledge for the next project when I redo things. I'm gonna do this big wave now, and to do that, I'm gonna start with my underwater color, this dark turquoise kind of color, and do just like I did with these waves. There's going to be a gradient that goes from more reflection at the base of the wave to less reflection as it goes up onto the face that is facing the viewer. It's really the same shape as these, just a giant version of it. And so I'm going to just make that gradient going up, and then I'll get into the other colors as I progress. So I need some of this underwater color, and I'm going to overlap just like I've done with the rest of the picture. I want this wave to be nice and big, and so I'll probably start my gradient a little bit below my line. Here I didn't come all the way up to my line, so that's probably a good height to start at. So over here I'll just overlap a little bit, and I always want to remember to keep the base of my wave, overall a level line. I don't want a wave that's looks like it's coming closer and further and closer and further. And if just like I explained at the beginning, that can happen if I don't have, for the most part, a level line at the base of the wave. All right, so this base color, I'm putting that on here. Now I went a lot higher than I needed to go. I'll be overlapping on that. Right now, what I'm really concerned about is just getting a nice gradient that goes from my existing wave texture to the face of this giant wave. All right, now I'm gonna, just like I've been doing all this time, I'm gonna wipe off the excess from my brush, and I'm gonna do those same little reflection strokes, just continuing right from where I left off, right on that line. And I'm using very short strokes, and I think that I want to try to do a little bit more, they're not as stretched out and long. I want them to look like they're getting pulled upward now, so I'm doing short strokes. And I'm kind of doing a circular motion with my hand so that my brush, comes closer to the canvas in the middle of my stroke movement. And that makes the middle of that stroke shape fatter. And I think I'm slightly going to tilt them this way because this wave is moving. Over here everything's tilted, so now as they're going up onto there, just like these lines here, I'm going to tilt my strokes a little bit as they come up onto the face of this wave. Now I would like it if, you know, I think the quicker I can get just the right look without going over it a million times, the better. Because here where I went over it a lot, I think that does not look as good. Now even though this is just so tiny, I'm still trying to stay with my pattern of blending the top side of the strokes. Just little dots up in here, hardly visible really. Okay, now I'm going to come over here. I guess I already had paint on there. I think it dried a little bit, so I'm just reapplying. I want to keep track of where my line is. Do the same thing here. I want to get just enough of that underwater color there that it's covering that white background. I see it showing through a little bit. Okay, now I'm kind of, instead of holding the brush sideways, since I'm doing such short strokes, I am putting the point, the long point of the brush is pointing a little more at the canvas. This time it allows me to get shorter strokes that still have those tapered points. I'm just barely dipping the point of the brush in the paint. Okay, I'm stepping back to examine my line. It looks like this goes lower. So I'm going to bring that up a little bit. My paint kind of dried on that spot, so I might come back to it. Just trying to barely catch the top edges of those strokes if I can. Right here now. Now this is right under that curl. And so by the time this is over, I'm going to have the reflection of that curl in there. But for now, I'm just worrying about this one thing. Just getting that surface to curve up onto the face. Just like I did before, try to catch a few of those brush strokes. If anything looks, you know, if it just looks especially like a little white line instead of a shape that kind of blends out into the others. I just look for those little spots that stand out. I mean, it seems like a real tedious thing, but I think when there's a method to what you're doing, you know, it's not really sweating the small stuff, it's just knowing the way the small stuff needs to look altogether and having the ability to adjust it to whatever length you want. I think when you're doing a lot of guessing on things that small, it's real discouraging. But that's not the case here. It's not guessing. You know, I just allot some time to do the real tiny details because I know that it does make a difference. Okay, just dipping the point of my brush in there. I'm going to bring my reflection up Oh, that's interesting. I just now realized something that I should share. When I flipped my brush around like that and started going the other way, you know the fat edge that you get on a stroke, you do this and then you can see I've got fat edges on my brush strokes. And so you get those little white lines. When I flipped my brush, it went to the bottom side instead of the top side. When I went this way, I didn't like it was leaving. You know, I like the top side of each stroke to be more faded, to be the one that fades into the dark. So it's not good if I have a bright line on the top of my stroke, like this one, for instance. See that bright line right there, and then this one here, there's a bright line on the top of the stroke. I try to avoid that. But when I flipped my brush around, it went to the bottom. So, you know, just a side note. You know, knowledge about what makes something look the way it does is so valuable. And it allows me to make a decision how close I want to get to. You know, with everything I paint, I usually know how it could look better, but just have to stop for practicality's sake. But it's really nice to know, because when you're in a situation where you've got time to put in on the little details, it gives you direction, gives you a path to take to get something dialed in further. And I like it. You know, I like having that ability, that control. And it's just knowing. I see all kinds of shapes in here that are not the best. I know they could be better, but I have peace of mind just knowing that, well, if I really need to dial it in, then I can always come back and spend my time doing that. It's just not the most important thing ever, so I'm going to leave it. Since I don't have the most steady hands ever, I find it challenging to aim my brush strokes and make sure that I'm leaving a little bit of space in between each stroke, because you want that to leave the little dark waves behind. I don't want to close it all in. But, you know, on that note of being able to control that, I do find that there's some muscle training that happens with repetition. I feel my shoulder and my whole arm kind of lock up to keep it steady. Having my elbow down low, having my shoulder close to my hand. This is where I'm the most steady. It's like this. So you'll see me painting like this a lot. I think other people are really just better than I am at aiming the brush strokes, being able to hit a real small target. I'm just working on getting the brightness level of this. I keep adding a little more reflection color because I want a nice smooth transition. You know, I just needed that a little brighter so that it smoothly goes into that. See, I lost all my dark colors in there. It's all just the reflection color. But I'm gonna leave it for now. No big deal. I just went across my whole wave, and you know, I'm getting a fairly level line. I see that it's a little bit low right there. And so, you know, I might adjust that a little bit, just because I know that a tiny bit of change this way looks like a lot of distance change. I'm just going to get right up in here and try to really get those little edges that I'm having trouble hitting. I'm just putting the faces of the waves back in there, using this dark color and just blending on the dark area rather than the light. Just because I can. Put a little more of this deep water color, underwater color. Just got to get a little brighter than it was. It was kind of dark. Drop in the middle of that wave down. That looks like it might be better. I'm kind of losing some of my little wave shapes, so I better stop. No, it's still not better. It still is low in that spot. When I stood back a little further, I saw it. So I'll just add one more little row. I just didn't want to do this because I don't want to lose all my little wave shapes. But it is important that I have that consistent height of that reflection. I want that wave to have a nice straight line to it. Now this spot looks like I could do a little more on it too. Let's do a little bit more underwater color right here. That area just kind of lost my little details in that one. I think that's going to get darker, you know, like I've said before, it'll trick you. Make you think that it's not matching the other colors because it's wet and it's lighter, but when it dries, it's a darker shade. Okay, I'm going to try to get rid of some of those sharp edges on the tops of my brush strokes. That's just a bright spot right there. I don't know what to do with that. Yeah, it looks a little more consistent to me. Maybe just a few little strokes in here to even it out. You know, there's no shame in doing everything a few times. It's my painting. And that is exactly how I get better at doing all of these techniques. It's just by doing them so many times. It's nice to have a pretty picture in the end. But my main goal is mastery of the techniques that make the painting. Now the next thing I'm going to do is have my white and a green on hand, so I'm just using this lid as a palette. And I'm going to be adding the white and green to my underwater color to get the nice bright sunlit wave. So I'm putting my phthalo green and my titanium white on this lid, and I'm going to put that same underwater color on this wave. So I still have my underwater color batch mixed, and I did have to mix more of it. So it's good to remember, you know, if you can remember the ratios that you mix to get a color. It's not like you can't eyeball it to get there again, but it's easier if you try to remember those ratios. Anyway, back to the wave. I'm putting this blue all the way down to where I left off, maybe even overlap a little bit. I want to continue with my reflection on the surface, but I want to lighten my color as I go up too, so I have to change the base. Just like I added this color into my foreground waves, I'm going to add my brighter greener color into this big wave in the background. So whenever I lighten, I also need to add green. So I'll start just by adding white. And you can see that it looks okay, but it doesn't really look like light is shining through it. Maybe a little bit, but not as much as if I add some green. So I'm going to blend this down like this. And I'll even do my strokes in the same shape as my waves, you know, just so that everything is kind of consistently giving that same feel. Now really I should have added the green in before I mixed that down, but I just wanted you to see the difference. You know, that's not with any green. Now I'm putting my phthalo green in here. Let's put a little bit more. Right up there, and a little bit more white. So just being a little bit more on the turquoise side is going to make this look a lot more like the sun is lighting it up from the inside. So I'm going to try to pull these two colors together as much as I can. I want it to get darker as it gets down to the base, because the light in a wave will typically not make it all the way down to that base. And you know, waves have this cool effect, I believe it's called caustics, where the light is concentrated into those squiggly lines that you see on the floor of a swimming pool or on a real clear beach. And so the light gets concentrated because of those pyramid-shaped sides of the wave. It goes into the middle, and a lot of the time it leaves a darker area surrounding the base of the wave. So you'll have darker water at the base. Also, just because there's a natural shadow, you know, the sun's shining down and the wave is just making a shadow. Okay, I've got a base on there, and I don't need my reflection to go way up onto that bright spot. I just want to carry it up a little bit further so that it looks like there's a nice gradual incline going up this wave. You know, I don't want it to look like it's a very sudden spike. It just suddenly goes up, because it's not one of those little waves. I mean, this is a big wave, and you can see on these, you know, there's a good amount of reflection at the base of that on any of these little waves in the foreground. I almost always have to come back to my first few strokes and lighten them up. They go on brighter than I want them to. Then I just come back and go over them again. No big deal. The higher I go with this reflection, the more it's going to look like a gradual incline up the face of this wave. So if I want the wave to look like a real big swell, then I'll keep going. Now I'm going to do the same thing I did before. Just identify maybe just a couple of these little waves that catch my eye as being a little bit unnatural looking, and just work on those couple of individual waves. Maybe somebody else would see different things, but I'll like my painting better if I know I did it. Yeah, I like the look of that. That's off to a good start. Then I think I'll just kind of put a few more of these darker strokes while I'm in that darker color, you know, up on the face of that, because that might be reflecting. A lot of times, you know, a wave will reflect itself as it's curling over, or maybe there's just areas that are at an angle to your vision that are not letting quite as much light through. So if I kind of do curved strokes, and this is still a little bit wet, this base, so this is going to be easier to blend in. Just a little bit of texture on the face of this that suggests that there are angles, makes the wave look a little bit more rippled maybe. But I think it's good if it's very subtle. And I'll kind of bring it down and intermix it with that reflection color. I don't really like how it looks if I do it wet on dry. Once that dries, you know, I think it's best if I just reapply it than if I keep doing that. Just because I don't get great shapes, I think. But that's a matter of preference. Whatever you want to do. Now up here, it's the same thing, lighter and greener. So as with all the rest of this picture, I'm going to overlap the previous section. And you know, I always lose some of it in the process of doing that. It's just kind of, you know, goes with the project. So I've got my pure white that I'm going to add, get this nice and light. And then I'm going to add green and make sure that as this approaches the top of this wave, it's both lighter and greener, so that it just looks like it's glowing rather than just being lighter. It actually has the look of having light inside of it. That's what the green does. It makes the look of light being inside of it. And you know, I really am liking the way, even if it's not the most realistic look ever, I really like the way these brush strokes look as they mix together. That's just a cool look. So I'm going to try to maintain this look and do little brush strokes. It looks a little bit like the texture of the wave, like the reflection on it. So rather than mix this completely smooth, I think I'm just going to leave this texture on here. But I do want to try to get a nice continuous, you know, gradient. So in here, that's kind of a sudden change. So I'll put my dark color at the base here again. The base of my wave ended up rising up with the reflection. I went higher and higher with the reflection, so oh well. As long as I do the same thing on all the other sections of the wave and carry that height across, you know, it just needs to be level in the end. Okay, so I'm over here on the next section, and I'm going to put green and white in here, and then I'll start putting reflection in it. Green here This is where it's starting to curl over, so the direction of my strokes is going to change a little bit. Going right here. You see I'm doing a little bit of a sharper curl and just making my brush strokes go with it. You can see that I keep doing the same direction of brush stroke too. I always go top. That's just, you know, it's just kind of my comfort zone, is doing it that direction. It's not that it has to be that way. If another way comes more natural, then I recommend going that route for yourself. I just want to see a consistent change from this brighter greener color to the darker bluer color. It's hard to do this all while it's still wet, but if I can fit a little bit of a shadow into that top area, I think that would be good too. Maybe I'll just use the blue. I think in reality it'd be more of a gray version of this color on the top of this wave, but it'll probably look nice and pretty if I just use blue to make the shadow on the top. And that's where it's starting to curl over and leaving a little bit of a shadow. So it's good just to get that out of the way now, put that shadow in there while the paint's still wet. It allows me to get kind of a nice blended soft shadow, which is kind of what I want. Like this. When I put the top of that wave, it's going to cover a lot of that up. I really don't want it to be that extreme. I might have gone too far with it over here. I'm going to add a little bit more of my bright white and green on this section of the wave. There we go. Now it looks kind of funny with that dark line at the top, but that's going to go away later. Okay, so next step is that reflection color. And my paint has dried a little bit, so I'm not sure how smoothly I'm going to be able to put this on there. Let's just find out. I'm going to reapply this color right over the top of where it was the first time. And then my reflection should tie it all together. This is so small and so distant that I think even if it doesn't have the exact same blended look as the rest, it'll still be fine. Let's get that up in this area and bring these two sections together. Now I want to stress that I'm not trying to angle these strokes extremely. It's just a little bit more curved. As I go up on this wave, I'm not turning my reflection strokes, that is. You know, these strokes that I did this part with, I bent those right along the curve of that wave, but this reflection, I'm keeping it pretty level. And I just want to stress the importance of that. It might look a little bit funny if you curve that reflection around like that in those longer curvy strokes. You know, since reflection, the nature of reflection is for all similar angles to reflect the same light. So, you know, you don't want to put a completely different shape on there, because that would be like, you know, a different angle on the wave reflecting the same light. But anyway, the short explanation is just that it's going to look more natural if I keep these strokes more on the level side, even as they're starting to move up this wave. I'm not even worrying about blending now. My paint completely dried and I'm just doing wet on dry, just leaving hard edges because it's also distant. You know, it'll be okay. Let's put that dark back in there. See if I can do a cleaner job with that one. Alright, same thing in here, but there's less light where this is curling over. So there's going to be less light coming out from under this curl. So I'm going to do more of my deep watercolor, less of this green and white. I'm still putting it in there, just not as much. I'm going to put a little more of this dark color down because that base dried, and you know, it's really just that I like the way it looks when it kind of blends, but I don't even think it's necessary. I mean, you could do this all wet on dry. You can look at my How to Paint Waves series and see the wet on dry technique. It's a good looking technique, you know, and so I don't think it's totally necessary to always have a wet base coat before I do the reflection. It's just something that I'm enjoying on this painting. I just want those little bits of reflection to be very subtle in there. I don't want to have big, you know, more like dots. I guess I am doing vertical strokes, they're just very short. I'm just gonna kind of obscure this. Looks like I could use a little bit more right in that little dot. Trying to get the tiniest bit on my brush. Just barely dipping that brush in. Okay. Let's try to just make this more like the rest. Maybe I'll just get a tiny bit of that darker color and try to softly blend this down into it. There we go. Just more even. You know, I always say that, don't I? I can always come back and return. It's my way of assuring myself. My paint's kind of dry and quick now because of so many layers. So I'm using a little bit of water now along with this base coat. Got my blue at the top and bottom. I got my green across the middle. Alright, let me try to put that reflection in there now. See, shorter strokes are going to look better. They're almost just dots. Get a little water on my brush and see if I can just blend that into there without having to redo reflection. I think I went a little bit too high with that reflection. Oh. Man, I really wish that I would have just got it right the first time. No, it's worth working on. Now I like the way this has turned out and everything, the shape and the color, but it keeps tricking me. By the time it dries, it's darker than you know what I want it to be. So I've got to go lighter than I've been doing. It doesn't have to be done again. It's just I just really want to see more of a glow. It's just my preference, you know. I want to see more of a glow in the wave. So, you know, this is a good demonstration of my typical process when I'm doing a painting of painting and then repainting, painting over it. It's good to have the freedom to do that as many times as I need to get it where I want it to be, instead of just really hoping that it comes out right that first time and then just trying to stop so I don't mess it up. You know, I hate that approach to painting just because of how stressful it is for me. Okay, so I'm just trying to really copy this brightness that was over on this side. That's the brighter part, and I liked that section. That's how it goes a lot of the time when I'm mixing color. You know, this is more similar to mixing primaries, where none of these colors are close to what I want the result to be. And when I do that, I end up with a lot more variation, little variations from brush stroke to brush stroke, because they're, you know, they just end up being different mixes of the same colors. And because of that, you know, it gives a lot of examples, and I'll just kind of pick my favorite little spot. Okay, I'm going to add more white over in here. Now I'm also going to my water every so often. See, that was just a brush load of water. And when I dip in the water, you know, it's just one quick little, you know, it's not a swish, it's just a little junk halfway in there. I mean, I can't even tell. If I wasn't looking, I wouldn't even know that the brush dipped in the water. It's just a tiny bit. And it just is helping me to keep my paint wet enough to not tack up on me. I'm going to add a little more of that green. on this side. Just trying to soften these areas. And now I'll get just a little bit of that deep color and try to blend it in. Hopefully this time I got it dark enough. We'll see. I like the way the reflection looks there, so I really don't want to mess it up. Just because I can redo everything doesn't mean I especially love to redo everything. It's just nice being able to. You can see I'm just letting it go very soft now. When I did it the first time, I had all of those brush strokes showing. I mean, I feel like either way it can be good. Just depends on the look you want. This one's just what's easier for me to work out right now as I'm trying to get this color better. You know, I just don't want it to happen again. I'm gonna just brighten this just across the top here. I don't want to redo this again and have the same issue. I said make the same mistake. It's not a mistake, you know. It's just a matter of not having it where I want it to be. So I'm going to go a little further than what I feel like I need to, so that I can be extra sure. Just trying to evenly distribute. I take from the light spot, put it on the dark spot. Okay, I'm going to stop while the paint is still wet enough. I like the texture of the wet brush strokes. You know, I don't especially love it when it gets dry and it starts to drag. It doesn't really make that much of a difference when you're standing back looking at a painting, but when you're up close to it, it does look nice to see softly. You know, wet on wet has a nice look to the brush stroke texture. I'm going to see if I can do the same thing on this side. Right across the middle. You can see I've done all different orders of this application. You know, I did the blue first and then added the green. I'm doing the green first and adding the blue. I did the white first and then added the green then the white. You know, I think the order is not so important as just knowing where you're trying to get the end result. Now this is going to be real dark, so by the time I get this deep water color mixed all into it, so I'm going to plan on adding more white. It's just a little bit overly green. I don't want it to look like antifreeze, even though that would be a cool look. Bright green. Okay, now I've got some blue mixed into that, so I'll add some more white. Bring it up to the top of the wave. If I get to a point where I really like the balance of color, you know, then I might wipe my brush off so that it doesn't keep putting other color in what I already like. You know, so then it's just a blender brush. It's not applying paint anymore. I'm just trying to lightly drag this down to where that reflection stops. Now maybe I shouldn't completely mix that out because I kind of like that little bright white spot. It kind of looks like a little bit of, you know, maybe debris in the wave that's catching the light somewhere. So I'll just go ahead and leave that. And I know it's going to get darker than it looks like it. It's already tricked me several times. Okay, now I'm switching to my flat brush here. I like to get the bristles wet before I use it. And so with this flat brush, it's not necessary to use this brush, it's just faster. And I'm gonna paint my sky. So I'll put some white. This I want to be a fast technique because this painting is not so much about the sky. So I'll just put my white directly on the canvas, and I want it to be very subtle, hardly any blue at all, just enough to make it look like it's not a blank white canvas. So I just added a tiny dab of blue on the corner of my brush, and I'm going to bring it down to the top of this wave. It's good to do it now because I'm not concerned about a little bit of overlap onto my wave. But if I finish that wave first, then I might, just want to take more time being careful. And I do like to get paintings done as quickly as possible. Without compromising the painting. It's not because I don't like to paint, it's because I want to move on to the next one. Alright, I'm just kind of randomly dabbing the color on there and then horizontal strokes to mix it together. It could use a little more blue. I'll put a little bit more on there, and put a little more white as well, because that's spread about as thin as it'll go. Maybe a little more water on my brush will help it to spread out thinner. I mean, it's really just white on white, so I don't need this to be heavy coverage or anything, and I'm okay with the texture of the canvas showing through. I mean, that would be one reason to not spread it real thin, is if you really want a brush stroke texture, which can be a real beautiful look in a painting, but I'm not concerned about it in this case, so I'm just going real thin, just getting the color on there. And if I have an area that's more white, like that big blob I put on there, I can just say it's a very misty cloud. It'll look fine as long as I, pull out some of these lines to make the shapes pretty horizontal. At least at the bottom of the shape. Then it'll look like a cloud, as long as, I don't know, you decide. Clouds are so many different shapes. I've been called out a few times for talking as though they all have that shape. I just find that those real horizontal strokes are a quick and easy way to get a horizon to look like a horizon. There, you see, I kind of just painted in the negative space there to make the top of a more puffy cloud. No need for any further detail, really. Just gotta finish my horizon right here. I got probably more blue than what I want right there. Let's put it up here at the top. If I need to put more blue down, I'll put it up high, because the horizon, I want to have more white in the top. It's just the way it naturally occurs. The horizon tends to be the lightest, having, just for the same reason you see more reflection here, the perspective bunches all of the light color of the reflection together. Here, the horizon, you're looking across usually a layer of humidity or clouds, whatever's in the atmosphere. And, you see a higher concentration of that lighter color substance that the light is hitting on the horizon. It's just, I think, has to do with just your angle that you're looking at it from. But for whatever reason, if you make the horizon lighter, it'll look a lot more like a natural horizon. Just get more of that pure white. I got a tiny bit of green. I pulled that off of that plastic lid I've been mixing paint on, so I got just a touch of green in it, but I think it won't be visible. I'm just kind of evening out my my brush strokes on this cloud. I've got some heavy spots, some real long streaks. It's not the nicest look, so I'm just gonna try to even it out a little bit. And if I already have some brighter spots, you know, it won't hurt to bring those out a little bit. Here we go. Nothing fancy, just highlighting whatever shapes are already popping out. Sometimes subtle can just be so nice, huh? I mean, my imagination just looks at this and just likes it. You know, I just imagine the depth and the other clouds that might be behind it. It's a cool thing that how the imagination kind of likes the lack of detail sometimes. I do love painting detailed pictures, you know, just for the fun challenge of it, I guess, but it's not the details that really make a picture nice to look at in the end. Here's a fun trick to do with horizons too, you know, if I have, you know, an identifiable cloud, then if I just go down below where the white part of it stops. Now this is all dry, it dried real fast on me. That's okay, I've got a real wet brush. This is a real thin watery layer of my blue-white mix. But what I'm doing is I'm just going to add some white under there and make a line. I added water first because it'll soften my line. But however you do it, you know, just adding white underneath the shadow of that cloud. So I allow it to go. It's white, then it gets darker, then a white stripe again. It'll look like a cloud behind a cloud. As long as they get flatter, more squished as I get down near the horizon, it'll add perspective to my sky and make it look like layers of clouds going further and further away. Now this next technique is going to use my green and white, the same phthalo green and titanium white I used on the rest of this wave, and my deep water, the same deep water color I used. And my watercolor is just down here in the shot glass, and then I've got these two colors right out of the tube on this plastic lid. I'm going to start with the white to make the line of where my water is crashing over this wave. So I'll start on this left side, and what I want to do is, you know, just make what I imagine to be little shapes that are crashing toward me a little bit to the right, just like this wave is doing. And so I'll make little tiny spikes coming out, for lack of a better word, little drops, you know, whatever you want to do. And then I'll also make some just squiggly lines, just trying to imagine a shape that is a wall of water that's starting to pull this way. And so really, I mean, I'm just making a very crooked line, but I am trying to just make my shapes kind of point to the right as I go. So the thing that I want to make important with this step is I'm going to use my colors to shadow. Let me bring this down a little bit more. I'm going to use my colors to shadow the top of this white section. I'll show you what I mean. And then I'm going to leave the white on the bottom of the section. And that's just because of the nature of water. The light goes in and bounces off of the underside where it would be going back to air again. You know, the light comes through, hits water, and then it would go through and go to air again. It bounces off of the air, just like a bubble underwater. That's essentially what it is. And so the effect is that you have this gradient where the white goes up into the color of the water. So I'm just adding a little bit. I'm just going to take some of my deep watercolor and put it right here on my palette so I have all of them in the same place, because I'm working with tiny amounts of the color. Okay, now the pure white, put that on there. And it's okay if it, you know, gets color in it and is not actually pure white. Now I'm going up here to the top, and then I'm just going to blend it down, and I'm going to try to add both of my colors, the green and the blue. Just because this is a smaller amount of water with a lot of light in it, so I want to be sure to add the green to make it look like the light is in that water. In it, not just bouncing off of it. Now I can make that little white strip at the bottom of this section really skinny. I mean, I can just make it the tiniest little white line. It'll show. A pure white line does not need to be a fat line in order to show up. And I can even use the point of this nice angled brush to make very, very tiny details. I mean, a very tiny white dot shows up really well on a painting. So there's no need to make this white area big and extreme. It usually occurs in more than one layer. You know what that white water is it's the highest points of all of these waves that are, you know, don't have the strength to stay fastened to the wave when they get flung upwards. So it's the highest points that fling off first. So these are actually little waves like this that are getting thrown off. So there's gonna be a lot of them. So I could put another layer of white up here and do the same thing. Put white, then put color, make another gradient. And maybe, you know, since this is a high part of the wave, you know, maybe I'll end on the white at the top because it's kind of getting thrown upward at this point. Maybe as much as it's getting thrown forward. It might be that one of those high points flinging off the wave are just right at the very top. So I'll just put some white across the top of the wave. Now my high points, those are the parts that haven't crashed as much. So naturally I want to do less of the white. So you can see me going thinner right there, making a skinnier line. And not only that, but I'll put a little more of the color in there. I'm just going to put a lower layer of the white coming down further so it's more obviously lower. So again, I'm putting color, and I think it looks cool to have maybe little dots of darker color in there too. It kind of looks like shadows. I don't know. Whatever you think looks good. Now I want to remember that the further I go to the right, the more I want to see that curve, because if this wave is going to the right, then that means I would be looking at this side of it, more of a direct 90-degree angle straight into the face of that water, you know, because it's turning this way in relationship to my vision. So this side, the perspective will look better if I have more curve visible on this side than on this side, just a little more. So I'm just making shapes, just trying to pull my brush the direction that I want the wave to be flying. Put the green and the blue in there. Then work on that little gradient. Now you can see that I have, this is something to watch out for in any painting really, is things that maybe seem overly geometric and predictable. This diagonal line just is really consistent, just a diagonal line right through a curved wave. I mean, I definitely think that could happen naturally. It just doesn't make for the nicest looking shape. So I'm gonna bring this, you know, what's a slightly lower part of the wave already, I'm gonna bring it down even lower just for the sake of kind of randomizing that wave a little bit. I like to get the more, as I said, geometric or the more recognizable patterns of my picture in place, and then add a little chaos to make it look more natural. But I like to get the patterns in place first. So I left more white in this area, and that'll look like the water is more agitated, more white water. I'm adding some little bits of water flinging off just by starting low and then blending upward. I'm going to do another row of that white coming over here too. Now it doesn't have to be a solid unbroken line, just just putting edges above the edges that I already did. So right here I'm putting a little more white water flinging over. And if you just remember that it's that lower edge that really makes it look like water curling over. Just putting the white on the bottom. You can mess around and put it all over the place, see what looks best. When I'm mixing colors, I work on balance first, lightness second. And balance means kind of looks cool having a wet base layer of that water, that underwater color, and then just adding the white to it, because the white kind of naturally drifts to the bottom of my brush, and just by doing this with my brush, it puts those little white lines in there. And I'm just going to get a base of what I really would want to be my darkest color. I don't want to go any darker than that. So I'll get that in there, and then just keep adding white. Keep adding white water blasting out over the top of them. And I'll put it down here too for a shadow. Probably more of my bluer color for a shadow will look better. And I'm doing the same thing, just a white area, then blend up. White area, blend up. And I just want to do a whole ton of that. And maybe my blending can be more dabbing, because I want it to look real splashy, and I don't want it to have a bunch of strokes in it like the water texture, the wave texture. I'm blending up in the direction of the curl of the wave. This is how I do trees a lot of the time too. From the end of the branches into the middle of the tree where the shadow is. Looks like a claw coming over right there. I don't want that. Maybe for another painting that would be cool. You can see I'm doing less as I get down here because I want a shadow. But I think it would look nice to not have it be just straight across. So I'll make one area lower than the other, make a couple high spots, maybe a low spot. I'm just trying not to make it so, just like that diagonal part of the wave. I don't want it to look overly geometric, predictable shape. There's a natural tendency to, when you're doing light over dark or dark over light, you go to where the color is not and add the color there. That's the natural tendency. But to break away from that, you go to where the color already is and add more. That's how you get it to look more natural, less ordered. Okay, now there's this cool thing that happens when a wave curls over, where you can see inside of this part of the wave. And the wave is this layer of water, and so you'll see just like a bubble can be seen underwater. Well, the tube of air that is underneath this curl can be seen from above the wave. So I'll show you what that looks like. It just has a white reflection on top of it, but the effect of it is there's dark on top of light, where you wouldn't really expect that for a solid object. But if you're able to get it in a wave, it makes it look, a lot more natural and watery. So I'm looking inside the water right here, so I'm going to add my blue and my green to try to get a similar color as what I already have in this wave. And I'm going to take that color right across the top. And it needs to be lower. This is where it's curling, so it's naturally going to be lower than these areas here. So let me try it at about this height here. But I'm not going to make it perfect. I want to add a little bit of arc to it. It's not like the base of the wave where a little bit makes a distance change. This is where, things are getting thrown up at different heights, and it's not going to affect my perspective by randomizing the top of this. But, it's just very slight. I think that they're usually somewhat level. So I have that real dark color. Now, it's not that dark. I just put that on because I like to get color balance before lightness. I'll put some white, lighten that color up. And I'm not going to worry too much about that very top edge, because I'm just going to add other color to that after I'm done with this effect. But this is fun. I put this on. Now I'm going to start pulling it in the direction that my wave's moving, so that all my brush strokes kind of represent that. And then I'll take pure white I didn't rinse my brush or anything, and I'm just going to put it right at the top of that and pull it in the direction of the wave. Not at the top, I'm putting it at the bottom of that dark section I just did. And it needs to be wet in order to get this effect. So I quickly want to get to my color that I just put down. You can always add water to it if keeping it wet is a struggle. So notice that it's not consistent, it's not even, and that makes it look more natural. I don't need it to be bright white, so I might go over this a couple times just to dim it a little bit. But I do like seeing it. So because I'm pulling it right into this color I just put down, it's going to have a lot of color in it, and I want that. That's what makes it look like it's inside of the wave, is that it has all of that turquoise color in it. There we go. That's enough. You know, I kind of want to have a balance of, you can see an edge, but it's kind of a soft and broken edge. And what it is it's the top of that air tube, for lack of a better word, that's underneath that curl. Then at the very top, I want to have reflection color. So I'll just go to my reflection color here, and I'm just going to water it down. My paint is probably too dry to blend at this point, so I'm just going to use a very watery layer of my reflection color. And just do the same thing, strokes that are in the direction of the curl of the wave. So in the end, the effect will be that what am I trying to say? The effect will be that there's a dark area in between two light areas. Here, just like that. I'm going to add a little bit of white to my reflection color because that's kind of hard to see. I mean, that angle is really just right under the sky. I think it'll look good if I lighten it. And I'm not going to be afraid to drag that color right down onto the rest of the wave like this, because it kind of runs out of my brush and it still stays brighter on the top section of it. Now I kind of lost that nice swervy shape of the top of my wave, and so all I have to do is just mix my sky color again and put that back in if I really want to see it there. And I do want to see it there, so I'm going to do that. Okay, so what I did was just a little touch of the phthalo blue and mostly white. That was my sky. So I'll just remix really any balance of those two colors, because this is just a sky. And if it's darker, it'll be sky. If it's lighter, it'll be cloud. I'm already thinking as I'm looking at this, I'm thinking I would really like to see this come up a little bit, a little more curl, a little less of that straight line still. I'm going to try mixing my this same mix, which was the phthalo green, it was my deep watercolor, which is right here, and some white. So I'll mix a color that, you know, is an approximate match. It's not going to be an exact match. And as long as you remember, you know, matching isn't the hardest thing ever, as long as you remember that it needs to be a little bit lighter than what you're trying to match, because it dries darker. Cutting off some of that white that's continuing that diagonal line right up to that peak of the wave. Yeah, I like that better. And then I'll just kind of retouch the the water there, the white water coming over. When your brush gets color in it, and then you start dotting with white while it still has color in it, you end up with this effect of the dark color gets right in the middle of each little dot of white, and that adds a very realistic look to your water drops. It's a cool effect. That's what happened a lot in this wave here, was just having the dark color in the brush, and then when I came back with the white, it just left the color in the middle of each little dot, which is what a natural drop of water can look like, or a section of water, not necessarily just a drop. What I'm noticing right here, now that that's dry, I'm just going to do a little bit more of that reflection real quick. I didn't go quite light enough on that reflection. I think I want to see that reflection on the top a little bit more. So it's my reflection color plus white, because I just don't see it if I don't add the white. All right, back to the splashes. Now I don't want to make it look like I need to always be going right with my template that I have. That's always subject to being changed. If I'm working on the top of this and I need more room to put a shape up higher, so I just do it. It's not, the goal here isn't to get things set in place and then stay with it. Okay, I'm going to go over here and I'll do, I'll kind of do white up in the middle of my dark area and then white down at the bottom of my dark area. Do 2 rows of it. What's fun is when you pay attention to these details, you'll go to the beach, you'll look at a wave, and you'll say, or you'll look at a photograph of a wave, and you'll say, oh cool, I painted that. I painted something like that. You'll notice these effects happening once you're aware of them. It's fun. It doesn't necessarily make your painting better. It's just, for me, it's a thrill in life to think to myself, hey, I learned that. Okay, I ran out of my underwater color, so I'm gonna put more along this edge. It's got a little bit of the green in it. I've got another curl coming, so I'll go about that far before I start working on the curl. See, I started way down low with that white because it just looked like there should be a little area flinging off. It was slightly lower in that spot already. Just by doing the dab with it, you can see that I have, like I was saying, you can see that there's a white border around each of my little dabs. See, if I just go like this, let me show you what I mean. If I just go like this, you can see that tiny little dot is surrounded by white. And that effect is really handy for making watery looking splashes. I'm going to do that. Maybe I'll reverse this time. I'll do this kind of area before I do all the white water on this curl. Let's see how that works. So I need that same underwater mix. It's the green and the deep water color. And we'll go, I want it to be similar in height to this, so I need to come way up to here with that. And then maybe not make such a perfect line either. Okay, now I'm going to put white in there. Now the thing that I have to remember is that that's going to be greener and bluer, more color when it dries, when the water dries out of it. Alright, I've got that curl, and now my reflection color. So I'll go reflection color. Right there, I know that's hard to see because of that messy palette, but I'm just mixing it with white. And I might not need to add so much water to this. Well, I will anyway. Because I don't want, if I add water, it'll be less, it'll push around the layer underneath less. And I don't want it to change that layer a lot. So I'll really water it down so it has a more gentle touch. See if I can get that dark area to show up a little more and just blend that middle area. Okay, now I'm going to add my deep watercolor in here and white. Get my shadows first. Now it's just Doing a whole bunch of splashes in there. Notice that I don't do the bright white underside all the way at the bottom of the curl, because that is a thick layer that is wrapping under, rather than just a little bit of water that the light can go all the way through and bounce off of. When it's that heavy and it's that much water piled up, it's like a cloud. It has a shadow underneath where the top layers are just blocking the light from getting all the way down. I like my streaks in there, so I'm going to try not to lose them all in the process of doing all these little dabs. Let's do the little dots of white at the very top of this. I don't want that dark border at the top of this. A few little dots will do it. You know, I started to get, when I brightened those top ones, it kind of made an outline, this even arc shape. I always want to try to avoid that. Maybe I'll come up in here and get rid of just a little bit of that water curling over. So I've got my green and white and deep watercolor to match this wave. Let's see how that works. That's pretty good. We'll just get rid of these little guys. Bring that way up in there. Yeah, let's get rid of that one. That'll dry darker, so I think it'll be a match. You can see it's just a little bit lighter now, but it'll dry darker. Let's make just a couple little dots of white to accent that. That looks better to me. Looks better, but I think I'll go even further with it. I like that high area of the wave, so I'm gonna make it more. I think this area could use a little bit more. Make it look like it's made contact with the ground a little more. So I'll put more shadow under here. And if I wanted to make it look like it's hit the base of the wave, the surface of the water, then I'll just make it less directional, less of that flowing direction, and just make a lot more of these little dots of splashy white water. I don't like the color that reflection dried too. So I'm going to give it another try, maybe add more white. It just looks really reddish, real purple next to that sky. This trick that I'm going to do is you just add a lot of water to the paint and just layer it to redo this. And it'll make that white, since it's white, it'll really make it look like it's buried in that water. You know, the most brilliant color you can get with paint is white under the color. Whatever color you're trying to get, put white under it, and then make it not 100% covered. That will be the brightest color you can get. The most colorful color you can get. You know, these pointed brushes, this angled brush, I think is a lot better for getting little dots. I've noticed with the square brush, it's a little harder for me to get just a dot. So I'm liking the way I can get these splashes a little better. I think a quicker way to do this would just be get a bigger brush and just dab away, you know. Every time I put a new brush load of white, I'm looking for the ends of my already lit areas, you know, so, you know, I'm not always going to a green spot. I want those, or turquoise spot, whatever you call that color. I want to maintain the look of it being broken apart. That's a trick too, you know, just do a little white. If you've got a little bit more on there than you want and you want it to blend in, just do a little wipe with your finger. You know, when I do real fine textures, in order to be more time efficient, I mean, not that this is going so quickly, but the way I do this is by looking for the areas in between little, you know, I can see where I've done a little dab with my brush, and so I do a whole bunch of little dabs, and then I look for the lines in between, and then I dab all the lines, all of the edges between my dabs. You know, I know that seems super tedious thinking about it on a detail level this tiny, but even on my giant murals, when I'm doing a texture where I just want to get a texture where everything is mixed up, I put, you know, some strokes or some dabs with my brush, And then I just look for all of the areas that are edges in between strokes, and I dab those areas. See, so right here, just looking for edges. So it helps me to aim my brush at areas that maybe will make more of a difference, rather than just randomly hitting the larger area. You saw me get rid of some of that white water just so that I can, it looked kind of square, you know. Let's put a little more bright white up here. Make it look like it's really coming forward. So where these waves are, these are that more violet reflection, but that doesn't look like reflection of this white water so much. So I'm going to put this underwater color that I've been working with the whole time right in there. Okay, I'll add a little bit of water. Keep it wet for a little bit longer for me. Now I'm going to mix white with that color, and it's mostly white. This is the color I'm going to be using right here, and I'll add water to that. See, it's just not a big enough area to pre-mix a whole batch of it. A little more water. I'm going to kind of wipe my brush on the edge of this lid to keep the shape a little more controllable. Alright, now my little reflection strokes. I want to keep them nice and short because I want this to look like it's kind of going up under the wave a little bit. This water's starting to rise up. That is bothering me. You know why? Because the color is wrong. So I'm not going to use that one. I'm going to wipe off whatever's still wet. It had too much green. That reflection's too green. I mean, it's regardless of any science behind why I mixed what I mixed, it just doesn't look right. So this it looks bluer, and so I'm going to add just the blue this time to the reflection rather than that. I added that underwater color that I mixed, which was this right here. That's got green in it, more turquoise. So this time I'm going straight to the phthalo blue for that reflection color. And mostly white. Maybe I should just use pure white because it's mixing with it. It's kind of a wet on wet technique right now. I'm on the verge of calling another redo. I really intended for that to look better. I'm wiping it off. I'm using my reflection color. Forget about everything I said about the reflection color under that white water. I'm just using the reflection color. And then I'll just add pure white where I want to highlight it. How about? Okay. Now let's see if I can repair the damage that I've done to my picture. There. It's starting to look like a brighter spot on the water. Okay. Good. Now I'm going to let that dry before I mess it up. So I've got these two waves, and you know, I still kind of think, well, they're pretty good on height. I want to make sure that the height of this and the height of this are very similar. They don't have to be perfectly level lines, but I want this whole wave to really look like it has a consistent taper to slightly smaller. But it looks pretty good. I just want to see what it'll look like. This is just an experiment. I like the way that wave looks, but maybe it could look better. I just want to see. I want to put this color on here again and see if I can brighten up the top of it. I just like the way that edge looks, so I want to see if I can make it stand out a little more. Only thing is, that's going to dry. It's going to be darker. Let's make it nice and bright. Now here's another last little thing I can do. I'll take my reflection color. Now my brush has a lot of water in it. I just rinsed it in the water, wiped it on the towel like I've been doing, and I'm just going to make real little strokes, and they're very short, and they're going to be very transparent because of how much water is in my brush. So that looks real solid now, but with so much water added to it, my hope is that it's going to go into a really darken and disappear somewhat as it dries. But I'm going with the curve of the wave. It's reflecting some of that white water that's curling over. So I like to do this after I get that white water, not before, because then I have kind of something to gauge it on. You know, I get to look at what I'm making a reflection of. I could do this right when I do the rest of the wave, but I just like to do it after. So I'll just go along the whole thing. I want to space them out because I don't want to change the whole feel of my wave and make the base of it look like it's even higher still. You know, I don't want to change the height of it or anything. I just want to have the look of this curl reflecting that white water that's coming over. So I'll just kind of put these all over this. There's not much white water to reflect in here. Maybe I'll just do it for effect to make it look like the sky reflection, just kind of wrapping up a little more, but it's subtle, you know. I kind of think I went a little bit too far with it already. Let me, you know, just in case I did, I'll just call a redo on that one. Now this is a wet on dry technique, so I can take any color and add to what's already there. You know, it's just layers of real transparent paint. So I'm going to use pure white and do the same thing to enhance the reflection of that white water. Just checking the paint before I put it on here. Okay. So where I already have reflection, I'm just going to make little bits of it that are pure white. The idea is not to cover over all of my current reflection color, but just to do bright white highlights in the middle of it. Man, I'm having a hard time with this. My hands are not very steady. I've got little bits of green in my brush, but I think it'll be okay right here because there's little bits of green in that wave too. Let me water down my paint a little more. I'm adding water to this pure white. A little more water on my brush. Now my last bit of reflection on the wave is just to put the dark reflection on the top, and the way I'm doing that is using the deep watercolor and watering it down. So I'm just using the same color I did down in here, and I watered it down and did the same thing I did in the other places, went with the direction of the wave, but you can see it's a lot darker. I was trying to just layer it on there real thin with water, but then I didn't like the way that looked. So now what I'm doing is I didn't like the way it looked because it was just too extremely dark in comparison. I couldn't get it to be thin and light enough. So now I'm just putting it on and then doing another layer. I'm going to adjust some of this a little bit further too while I'm at it. Doing another layer of lighter greener color on the face of the wave and just mixing it wet on wet, you know, mixing them together to get this texture. Here, let me show you what I mean. See, I'll just intermix this and then I get the direction that I want, that shows little strokes moving in the direction of the wave, but it just is soft. It doesn't have the sharp little edges and the high contrast of that dark color being right on the face of my bright wave. When you see something that just kind of sticks out to you as, you know, as something that could be better, it's hard to resist. hard to resist not doing it. Or hard to resist doing it. See, so I'm just going back and forth. Now I'm getting a more white and green mix and just intermixing it with this. You know, but leaving it just barely streaky enough to show the curving direction of the wave. You know, again, I didn't like such a diagonal shape on that. I tried to smooth out to make it a little bit more curvy. You know, I'll make it kind of spike up higher right here, just like I did on the other side of the wave. Then I'll get my white and green, and it'll mix with that blue. And I'll just keep the brush strokes moving in the same direction and see if that'll give me that feel of just real subtle reflections on the face of that wave. There would be reflections of the overhang, the shadows that are the overhang of that would be the dark reflections that I was trying to get by putting that dark color. I'm gonna do one more go with that reflection just because I'm curious about this technique. You know, I want to just experiment and see if there's any more effective way of doing this technique to get that feel of dark instead of light reflections, dark reflections on the top. You know, I think it's a good strategy to blend brush strokes together to get it to just have a very soft look, so that the details are obscured, so they don't need to be so right, because they're just blurry. But I just want to see if there's a way that I can put this on that kind of does have sharper, better looking details. I don't know. I think if I did maybe a little more diamondy shape, or maybe a little more evenly distributed shapes in between, it might have perhaps a more realistic effect. I don't know, we'll see. I'm just putting phthalo green and white in here. That's all it is, because I want blue in the mix, but that's what is already on here. So I'm just adding the green and the white with these little dabs. I'll just gradually mix it in. I think the problem with doing too many of these real tiny details is the wave does just start to look, you know, real streaky instead of a nice smooth watery look. So I have not found a perfect way to do all of these things. Just a good enough way. I still want to see if I can get just a little more brightness in this wave. Let's see. I'm putting just the phthalo green and white on here. I think that I just go over each stroke so many times it gets real streaky, but if I could do less, it looks smoother and more natural to me. That just means I have a hard time knowing when to quit. See, like right now it kind of just crossed that point, but it was too stark. The contrast was too stark between the dark and the light. I needed it to be more blended, so I'm kind of stuck between those two factors, trying to get it to be soft enough without overworking the brush strokes. I mean, in the end, if they're just all blurred together, it's gonna look all right. So I'm not worried about the painting not looking good. I'm just in the process of trying to identify the very best technique for this, and still undecided. Yeah, see, when I just do a few strokes and leave it, I like that look. All right, let me try it again. So this time, dark color and light color. I'm going to lighten it right away. Instead of doing a whole bunch of brush strokes, I'm just going to lighten it right away so that it's not quite as extreme before I start doing the individual strokes. So then I'm not trying to use the brush strokes to mix the paint, I'm just using them to add texture. So I'll put this dark layer down that I want in the end to look like the darker reflection on the top of this curl. And then there, that's a pretty good color match. Now I think it'll look smoother when I go to my green and white mix. Let's see if it does. So I guess I never really found the perfect technique I was looking for doing a nice bright face of a wave that still looks like it has some rippling waves on it. You know, I still would love to find a technique that's just right for that, but just having the colors on here is a good look. You know, I'll settle for just having those nice colors and just the direction of my brush strokes. I want to see a little bit more of this bright white reflection under this. I came back in here and darkened some of this little area here, and you know, it's a tiny thing, but you know, it is a subtle way to make the reflection look more like reflection by making it follow the shape of the top a little bit more. And I just noticed that I had kind of a square shaped reflection under a curve, so I just made it kind of more of a mirror image of this. It was just a tiny thing, but you know, I just like seeing the reflection look like the same shape as what it's reflecting. Something that can easily get lost when you're focusing on doing the individual waves.